r/NoSleep. Posted by you/alyssagalloo. I'm a guidance counselor, and some of my students have unusual abilities. Please like and subscribe to support us. I started to notice it about 2 weeks ago now, and apparently only among my 10th grade students. It started subtly, but I'd be walking down the hallway and out of nowhere, the sea of students would just part down the middle for a student that wouldn't ordinarily garner that sort of attention. Sometimes the students can feel a certain energy coming off of their peers and know to stay out of the way, but there was something about this that was different. Each student that unthinkingly stepped out of the way looked confused about the entire situation, like they couldn't quite understand why they had just moved 2 feet to the left. The student that now had a clear path just sauntered through the hallway, chin up, making eye contact with some of the more popular students just to show them the importance he now felt. The incident that really brought my attention to some unusual happenings was when a quiet girl, Alma, got sent to my office for creating a disturbance in class. I didn't really know Alma, or even know of her, and in my line of work, that tends to be a pretty good thing. She was a good kid, laid low, stayed out of trouble. I got the phone call that she was being sent to my office for a chat and had to look her up in the school's database to get the general details on her. Aside from being a normal guidance counselor that helps kids get into college, chats with them when there are things going on at home, another one of my jobs is to also talk to sporadic troublemakers instead of sending them to the principal's office. The thought is that these kids usually don't cause trouble, and instead of punishment for a first offense, we try to mediate the problem, figure out what's going on, and nip it in the bud. Alma's visit was one of those first offense type visits. She had gotten in trouble in class, and since it was her first offense, she got sent to my office with a detention slip instead of heading to the principal for probably even more slips. My office was located at the end of a hallway, and since it was in the middle of a class period, I could hear her coming long before I could see her. Her footsteps down the hallway sounded in short intervals and seemed to be coming pretty quickly in my direction. Once she came into my vision, Alma was a short girl, about 5'1" with short dark hair, glasses, and she was wearing a hoodie and jeans with sneakers. We don't usually allow hoodies in school, but clearly Alma was having an off day. I chose not to mention the hoodie because something in my gut told me she wasn't in my office for a dress code infraction. She was walking at a quick pace, and didn't slow as she bolted into my office and threw herself down on a chair directly across from my desk. She slid down so that the bottom of her chin was withdrawn inside of the neck of her hoodie, and she pulled the hood up over her head and right to her eyebrows, so the only part of her face that I could see were her eyelids to her mouth. After settling herself inside of her hoodie, she let out a little humph and lowered her eyes down and to the left, avoiding any possible eye contact with me. "Hello, Alma," I started. Clearly, there was something she needed to get off of her chest. "I hear something happened in class just now, could you explain what happened in your own words?" "Yeah. I can," she immediately countered back. "I always hear the situation from the teachers first, but like to open up our discussions with students by getting their side of the story." In this case though, Alma's teacher hadn't told me anything. She just told me she was sending Alma down for a strike one, and then hung up. Alma started, "Mrs. Rogerson shouldn't have picked on me like that in front of the class. She shouldn't have, and now she knows not to again." "Okay." I began after processing that first sentence from her. She didn't give me much information as to what this incident actually was. "Why should she not pick on you again, Alma?" "Okay, so here's how it happened," she huffed again, sitting up a little bit straighter and removing her chin from the hoodie. "I was just sitting in geometry class, minding my own business like I always do. The boys in the corner were talking and the girls up front were texting when Mrs. Rogerson turned around and I was just doodling in my notebook with my chin on my hand. She turned around after giving a demonstration on the Pythagorean theorem or something like that and looked right at me, and she almost never gives me any attention. We're both happy to pretend I don't exist. But she looked right at me and points at me, like I've never seen her do that either. She points right at me and she goes, "Alma, you tell me what you're doing right now," and I just said what, because what kind of a question was that? She started sitting up even straighter now, and her face was getting a little red as she relived either anger or embarrassment rehashing the incident firsthand. I had to admit, that didn't sound at all like Mrs. Rogerson, but I let her continue without interrupting. "So she demands to know what I'm doing, right?" So I go, "Honestly, Mrs. Rogerson, I'm listening, but I'm doodling in my notebook thinking that would be the end of whatever torture she's inflicting on me right now, but no, of course that wasn't the end. She caught me only half paying attention and she just couldn't stand that, so I had to be made an example of." She marches over to my desk, all red in the face, and at this point, everyone else in the class stopped what they were doing to watch this happen, and as she gets closer to me, I wanted to pull away from her, I really did, but I just couldn't. It's like something in my chest told me to stop backing away and to own up and embrace conflict, which is totally unlike me. But I did. I listened to the voice in my head, and I didn't back away. Mrs. Rogerson got to my desk at this point and pulled her hand back as if she was going to snatch my notebook off of my desk all nasty like. Before she could grab it, I don't even know what happened, I just know I felt pressure in my chest just release. I closed my eyes, and all of the pressure I was keeping contained was just let out. When I opened my eyes again, all of the desks around me had been toppled over, pushed against the walls, and Mrs. Rogerson and all the kids in those desks were on the floor, blinking back their confusion and rubbing various hurt parts of their bodies. With another hump she finished by saying, "And now I'm here." I watched her as she took a few deep breaths to steady herself. That last portion of the story had just flowed out of her without stopping to breathe properly. She was so worked up in the retelling of the situation that she couldn't rest until she got it all out and explained what happened to her. To her credit, she did her best to hide the look of fear behind her eyes. She knew that whatever happened to Mrs. Rogerson and the rest of the class came from her, but she doesn't know what it was. And neither did I. I let her sit there for a few seconds, catching her breath and catching up to the moment we were in now. It's important that when retelling a difficult moment, you give the storyteller a moment to realize that it's over, that it's in the past and we're in the now. Thank you for telling me what happened, Alma. I'm sorry you felt picked on by Mrs. Rogerson. You said she doesn't do that often, right? I made some notes on my legal pad that I had to for these types of situations. Just the classics. What happened? Who initiated it? Anyone hurt? Recommendations? Alma just nodded the answer to my question, and satisfied that I had enough to report, albeit very vaguely, on the incident, I decided to probe a little bit farther into whatever got us into this situation. When you were talking about a pressure in your chest, did it feel like you couldn't breathe? Can you try and describe it to me? I asked. Yeah, she said. It felt like there was an elephant on my chest. Okay, maybe not an elephant, but I have a black lab, and once when I was laying on the floor he sat right on my chest and my breaths came shallower, and this felt just like that time. Like my chest was being pulled toward the ground without the rest of my body. I pulled out my personal notebook and started to take down notes. It hadn't gone unnoticed that day in the halls when the students parted like the Red Sea, and it was a very strange coincidence that both Alma and that other student were in the 10th grade. It could all just be a coincidence, but it's a pattern I can't ignore. Alma, have you felt this pressure before? Has anything like this ever happened to you before? I asked. And the answer immediately came from her: no. Never, she said with a vehement shake of her head for emphasis. I have no idea what it was, where it came from, or how to make it happen again. It sounds to me that whatever the pressure you experienced was triggered by the incident with Mrs. Rogerson. What emotion were you feeling when she started walking toward you? I asked. Fear, she said. My heart dropped into my gut and I was just very afraid. Conflict scares me, and so does the unknown. I didn't know what she was about to do to me. Okay, Alma, I started slowly. I'm not going to call your parents yet, and we'll tell Mrs. Rogerson that we handled this situation and it won't happen again. But I need you to come see me every day and we'll chat. And I need you to avoid anything that could potentially inspire the same fear that you felt today. We need this to not happen again, and if fear was what triggered it initially, let's try and avoid that until we figure it out. Would you like to go home for the day? I asked her. Her face had slowly turned a very pale color. She just nodded at me, and I phoned the front desk to call her mother for pickup while Alma went to get the rest of her things. On her way out of the office she turned around and looked back at me and said, "Thanks, I'll see you tomorrow." If this really was me, we gotta figure out what it was and how to get it figured out. I agree. I countered. I'll see you tomorrow and we'll get to work. After she left my office, I shut the door and leaned back against it to catch my breath. I couldn't let her see any sort of unsure expressions on my face or she would be freaked out herself. I have absolutely no idea what I'm going to do with her for the next few days, but I know that we can't allow that to happen again. Especially if we already had knowledge that this could happen. For now, we'll just work on emotion management, which is hard enough for a teenage girl, but it's all I know how to do. I'll have to do research on my own, see if anything like this has ever happened before, or if we're all just simultaneously losing our minds. I'll have a plan ready for tomorrow. And I'll be armed with ideas and suggestions. I'm also going to call into my office the boy that parted the Red Sea of students. I want to see if there's a connection between these two. There must be.